Happy New Year, everyone. Good to see you here. Our speaker tonight is Julie Schopieray. She spoke here maybe 6 or 7 years ago. She wrote, her first book was about the history of George Custer's family in this area. And her second book was about the neighborhood where I live, which had been once called Edgewood Resort. So that's when I first met Julie, and we invited her to speak then. And now she's got this new book out about an architect. Julie is originally from Monroe County, but she's been here since 1984, so she's not quite a native, but she's not a resorter either. Anyway, we welcome Julie Schopieray, and she's got her friend Marley Hanson here, who has helped her with some of the research, and so she's interested as well. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me here to talk about my latest project about Jens Petersen, who was an architect in Traverse City at the turn of the 20th century. A lot of people have asked me, why did I choose Jens Petersen? I've never heard of Jens Petersen. Well, I hadn't either. It was after I started researching him, and as I found more and more about him, he became extremely interesting. And even though there were probably 4 very successful architects in Traverse City in the 1890s, it was difficult to find a whole lot about them, especially about their personal lives. But when I started to research Jens Petersen, I found quite a bit on him. And I think it's because of his personality. He was a self-promoter and a very ambitious man. So I kept going and I found more and more, and I ended up with enough to write a book, which this is what this is. These are Jens Petersen's parents, Christian and Ellen Petersen. Christian Petersen was a master brick and stone mason born in Denmark. And he came over to the United States in 1869 and married his wife Ellen in about 1871, I believe, and then they had their first child, Jens Petersen, the architect, in 1873. They lived in Belleville, Illinois, I think just outside of Chicago at the time. Kind of hard to see, but that's a family picture. Yes?
Can you?
Oh, am I still in the video?
Thank you.
Yep.
All good.
All right, this is the Petersen family, and after they came to Traverse City, and the house that you would expect a brick mason to build, it would be a brick house, which is located across from Munson Hospital on Elmwood Avenue. It was the first brick house built within the city limits in 1889. And a family photo. Clicker.
Do you know where the brick came from, since everything was built out of wood?
It was probably from the Graylickville, the Markham Brickyard, same bricks that the state hospital was. There's the subject of our evening here. All right, so it's going to be hard to read that. Jens Petersen's father, obviously being a brick mason, they were a working class family, but he decided he was going to follow in his father's footsteps and become a bricklayer himself. So he trained under his father, and that's just a quote from something that he wrote in 1911. Okay, this is probably my favorite picture of Jens Petersen. See if you can guess which one he is in the photo.
Oh.
Got a mustache,
The one with his hand up in here.
When I got this picture from Jens Petersen's grandson, and as I was learning about his personality, like, this picture is one of those, they say a picture tells 1,000 words, but this is him, this was his personality. He was about 18 years old when this picture was taken. And that is a group of probably other tradesmen working at the state hospital at the time. That's where he got his experience as a young man. You can see a man with a saw and a man with an angle, and there's another man with a trowel, and so these are all hardworking contractors. And here's this fresh-faced, young, ambitious boy saying, "Look, here I am." So Christian Petersen was living in Milwaukee in 1880 with the family, and when word came out that they were building a state hospital in Traverse City and needed brick masons, he and many others came over from Milwaukee. He was, I believe, a foreman on the job building this. This is the early building 50 at the state hospital. You can see the stumps. You know, they cleared the land and there's stumps there. So you can see the scaffolding.
Sure.
Quite a project. Christian Petersen, his wife, I believe, ran a boarding house at the time, and this is 1883, 84 when they started building this. And there I found, yes, it's not a census record, but it's a sort of a city directory, and there's a whole bunch of plumbers and brick masons and stone masons all living, boarding together with the Petersens. And I believe, you can see the building over here on the left. That building is still standing. I don't know what it's used for right now, but it was the Charles Chandler residence. And Chandler sold the property and eventually became property for the state hospital. So Jens Petersen was an ambitious young man. He decided in the 1890s that he wanted a little bit more than just to be a bricklayer his whole life. So he sent for a correspondence course out of Pennsylvania in architecture. And he completed the course in architecture with the best grades that he could possibly get. And in 1900, he secured a job with a prominent architectural firm in Chicago with James Gamble Rogers. And the Rogers office was in the Ashland building in Chicago. So Jens Petersen packed up his wife and family and left Traverse City to go to Chicago to get some training. He was in Chicago for 3 years, and in 1903 he took this Illinois state architectural licensing testing. Took a 3-day test to get a license in architecture, and he passed that, and he came back to Traverse City early in 1904. There were only 3 states at the time that required licensing for architects. It was Illinois, New Jersey, and California. So being that he was coming back from Chicago to Traverse City as a licensed architect, it's my belief that he was the first licensed architect in northern Michigan. There were other architects that were trained, had been around a lot longer, but they weren't licensed because it wasn't required in Michigan until 1915. When he came back to Traverse City, he took an office in the new state bank building. And that's the state bank building. Everybody knows where that is in Traverse City. And eventually he got an office on the 4th floor. And it's a west-facing window because at the time, in order to develop blueprints, they had to be exposed to the sunlight. So he had this sliding mechanism that the blueprint paper would go on, had big heavy glass plate on it, and it would slide out the window and be exposed to the light, and they would slide it back in. So I zoomed in on this postcard, and you can see in this window right here, you can see the remnants for the braces for the blueprint frame. So that was his fourth floor office up here on the corner, the southwest side of the building. His first project in Traverse City was for the Union School on Union Street in 1904. There were 3 other architects who submitted plans to the school board, and Petersen's plans were chosen, even though he was supposedly a Chicago architect. There was a little argument going on because some of the local architects weren't too happy because they thought they should be hiring somebody local. Well, he was actually a local, and he was coming back to town, and he submitted his plans, and they were chosen by the Board of Education. And the Union Street School was a beautiful, beautiful building. It was torn down in the mid-1950s, unfortunately. It's located where St. Francis Church is. Yeah. And I guess part of some of the beams that were in the church when they tore it down, or the school when they tore it down, were taken out and put into, if you know where Don Orr Ski House is out on East Bay, some of those beams used in that building are from the Union Street School. One of his other really big first projects was to get a contract for the Antrim County Courthouse in 1905. This is a picture of it under construction. And then he also built himself a house on 6th Street.
6th Street.
On 6th Street, in the last block before Division. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 houses in that block are Petersen designed houses. Jens Petersen believed in advertising very much. He was a self-promoter. He got the word out. He honestly believed that advertising was the best way to get word out about his particular product. So he, as you can see, these are all different kinds of magazines. He submitted this is a magazine called Letters That Make Good. It was for businessmen, and he wrote in telling about the success that he had with a letter that he wrote to help get himself some business. And you can't read it because it's too small, so I'll read it to you. It says, on page 274 is a letter contributed by Mr. Jens C. Petersen, which brought the most and best results of any letter he has ever used, and he comments on it as follows. This letter developed $2,275 worth of business from only $52 worth of advertising. It was the second letter used in answer to inquirers who had seen a certain one of my houses illustrated in a magazine. Those inquirers wrote in concerning these plans. Failing to hear from them, I wrote this letter. My explanation of this letter is that it had just enough antagonistic temperament to almost compel them to answer. My closing remark convinced them there was no other way than to answer my letter. So I'll read you the letter. So somebody wrote in and said, I'm curious about the house number 6 and such magazine. And then he didn't hear back from him. So this is what he would write. Dear sir, I wrote you on May 15th in answer to your inquiry regarding the plans of a house illustrated in the March number ... but have not had the pleasure of an answer from you. What is the matter that my communication did not interest you enough to get a reply as to whether or not the house meets your approval, or that I do not receive your order for the plans, specifications, and details for such a nice home? I'm sure you were interested in this house and anticipated building, or you would not have asked for the information. But the fact remains that I either did not convince you of the beauty and inexpensiveness of this style of building, or that the plan did not fully meet your ideas of a home. In either case, I have failed in my efforts by not giving you the information you wanted, or by describing a plan that does not meet your approval. I am willing to spend considerable time and money to answer all of your questions. Will you spend 2 cents to answer mine? If you wrote out of curiosity, tell me that. I will be satisfied. If it is the curious people who learn, and I want to know why I have failed to interest you. The definite promise of service that goes with my plans and specifications is a prestige building power and will be a money saver for you. I enclose a return envelope for your reply and remain yours very truly.
Wow.
I always think that this letter reminds me of my grandmother, who used to send me a self-addressed stamped envelope and blank stationery if she didn't hear from me. So. Yeah. Early in Jens Petersen's career, he specialized in concrete products, concrete blocks. There was a man in Traverse City who had invented a machine to make concrete blocks right on site. So if you've seen concrete block houses or buildings, you could make them right on site. So he worked with that man, but he specialized in concrete houses, which was a pretty new thing, because most people thought of concrete as sidewalks and bridges and things like that. They hadn't really considered that concrete was a good building product. But he managed to find ways to make concrete houses that were very attractive and sold quite a few of them. And then there's another ad here that's kind of funny. I can't read it. It's called, he had started a masonry supply company in Traverse City, and it says $300 for a crow. Paying $300 for a crow would be as reasonable as paying big retail prices for things you can buy at nearly wholesale prices. So he's promoting his masonry supply building. So that's another one of his ads. On the bottom, concrete block houses costing from $600 to $2,500.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, imagine building a house for that now.
What year are we looking at there?
That would have been 1905, 1906.
Thank you.
Now, when I had discovered some of his house plans in a publication called Concrete, it was a trade publication. They had house plans, they had anything to do with concrete. If you were any kind of builder that used concrete products, this magazine was something that you might subscribe to. So he submitted a lot of house plans to this in between 1907 and 1911. There were quite a few houses that he put in. This is a kind of a recent discovery. I became interested in kit houses, Sears kit houses, and Montgomery Ward and Aladdin, and started kind of looking at some of the magazines online, and came across one that had been, this is the very first 1908 Sears catalog, and when I looked at them online, I went, that house looks familiar. And then I pulled up the concrete magazine, and I put them side by side, and I went,
That's the same house.
that's the same house, even down to the curtains in the windows, the same thing. And I thought, no, wait a minute, did they steal that? Did they just borrow it out of there? How did Jens Petersen's house plans from 1907 get into the 1908 Sears catalog? And there were 4 of them.
Oh, of course.
There was that one. And then there was yet another one, and you can see, if you look close, you probably can't see from where you are. This is Jens C. Petersen, and that's the same house. So I found a woman online who's a specialist in Sears houses. She's a very reliable source. And I messaged her and I asked her, I said, how could this happen? This, you know, what's going on here? And she wrote back and she said that